I want to continue to talk about the bigger picture. Joining me here on set, Michael Green, portfolio manager and chief strategist at Simplify Asset Management. Thank you for being with us. So, look, no change. That was expected. Waller and Bowman dissented. That was somewhat expected, which is unusual, but it was some. And just saying that the growth moderated in the first half of 2025. Your thoughts on what we're getting today?
I mean, this was the easy way out, right? We had the same basic response from the Bank of Canada earlier today, where they held rates unchanged. Today, the Fed is basically doing the exact same thing and pushing it. We'll really care about the commentary. At this point, it ultimately matters more what Powell says. And there will be lots of questions about his sticking around. There'll be lots of questions about the pass-through of tariffs. There'll be lots of questions about the slowdown in economic activity that they are flagging in this report, but they're not responding to. And so, this does seem to be a situation in which the Fed was largely trapped. He can't really cut interest rates because markets are near all-time highs. He also can't really do anything, he can't really respond to the underlying economy in this framework, because if he cuts rates, that's cutting incomes for the vast majority of people in money market funds, savings accounts, CDs, et cetera.
It's interesting how the unemployment rate remains low, labor market conditions remain solid. Then he also talks about inflation, which is somewhat elevated, and that the committee is attentive, I like that word, to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate, and that they are strongly committed to returning inflation to 2%. So they have their eyes on both, but don't seem like they're particularly worried about either at this moment.
I think that's right, and I think in both situations it's wrong for totally different reasons. So part of what we are seeing, we have decided to eject workers. Illegal, perhaps some obviously may not be, but we've decided to eject workers from an economy that is already struggling with very low birth rates, very low population growth. The labor force has actually contracted. The indications that we have in terms of the types of labor force participation people have is that they are increasingly marginal, lots of activity in the gig economy, et cetera. The idea that the labor market is tight is simply a function of that very little growth. Unlike the 1970s, when the labor force was growing nearly 4% a year, now it's growing less than 1%, significantly less than 0.5% a year. So he's largely taken care of on that front. On the inflation side, we got the news today from the Cleveland Fed that the average shelter numbers came in significantly lower than they have been reported in CPI. The new numbers came in catastrophically at -9%. Now that will be revised higher, as every single one of these Cleveland Fed new tenant rent indices have. But on almost every framework, in a holistic sense, the rate of change of prices in aggregate in the economy is already below his target levels.
And I think you make a great point about birth rates and the workers that we need and or have or don't have. How about this press conference coming up at 2:30? It can be very exciting, folks. I mean, look, he has the prepared statement, but then the questions come. And, what are you listening for?
Well, I think it says something about us that we do think this is very exciting. But let's be very clear on that.
It's very exciting.
It's very exciting. I actually agree with that. I am that sort of nerd. But this is going to be a very interesting press conference. As we started to see in the last press conference, he's starting to lose control of the press. The press is less respectful to him and less genuflecting in terms of their responses. There was an anger that started to seep out last press conference that we hadn't seen since Powell was a brand new Fed chair. My hunch is this could be even more fireworks.
And look, I mean, his time is up next spring.
Next spring, yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure on him to sort of quell the concerns of everybody. He's got to make sure everybody's happy here and get that Goldilocks response. Like, oh, we can cut. We're ready to cut, or no, we're, right? I mean, there seems to be both sides of the fence that he's got to play and keep them happy.
I think that is actually the crux of the issue. So we've moved beyond an environment in which people were skeptical, they were very worried about events, and by and large came to the conclusion that Powell had managed to navigate at least part of the process. With the vitriol that has been raised by President Trump and others on the Republican side, that seems that halo has been pulled. Mm-hmm. And as I said, my hunch is there's going to be some fireworks later today.
How about some kudos for a soft landing? If something worked out in his favor.
Well, it's an interesting one because what we are seeing in the evidence is that soft landing is basically the combination of a +1 and a -1. And so there's a sizable fraction of the U.S. population. Well, this is the K-shaped economy framework, right? So there's a sizable fraction of the U.S. economy that is really, really struggling and tapping into food banks and feeling very insecure in their labor position, in their housing, et cetera, particularly concerned about things like healthcare costs, et cetera. There's a second group that has benefited tremendously from these policies, that have participated in the stock market, that have seen their home prices or their home costs locked in low interest rates in 2020 and 2021, and have now seen their money market rates rise nearly exponentially versus those mortgages that they entered into. And so they're in a very positive carry position. You know, one minus one equals 0. I think that's probably a better call than the soft landing in which everybody ends up winning in some form or another.
And look, I mean, the credibility of the Fed was something that everybody talked about. It started back in 2018, really. And, you know, he's under the microscope here, so he has to really tread very carefully. I mean, when some people say that we should cut here at home to sort of be competitive with other countries that are cutting, what do you say to that?
Well, there's an element of non-arbitrage conditions that play across. It really, ultimately, the U.S. policy is the one that matters around the world. Most countries are going to, in one form or another, try to sync themselves to our policy in one framework or another. And so when the Fed decided to hike rates, the rest of the world was forced to do so. We now see the impact of that. While we can argue about the stock market being at highs or meme stocks running, nobody is making a decision to buy GameStop or, you know, the latest meme stock on the basis of did the Fed cut by 50 basis points or hike by 25 basis points. Those decisions are happening in the tens of interest rate sort of framework. What we have right now is a situation in which we feel trapped, and I think we recognize that the Fed is trapped. It's what's in chess called Zugzwang, where there is no good move to improve your position. If you cut interest rates, you'll likely adversely affect the dollar, run the risk of inflation returning, particularly for goods that are already experiencing pressure from tariffs. On the flip side of that equation, if you don't cut interest rates, we literally just saw that this quarter was the worst existing housing sales in, you know, the past, I believe it's 35 years. That's a pretty extraordinary statement when you consider that that actually includes the global financial crisis and a once-in-a-lifetime housing bubble collapse.
The one set of language, when the Fed had said uncertainty had diminished, the people took that as a good thing in the past, but they removed that language, and now I was seeing more about uncertainty about the outlook remains elevated, so they're back to some nervousness, I would say. Overall, I mean, when you're putting together portfolios, you're investing, you're seeing record high after record high. I think we're up to 16 or 17 record highs for the S&P. S&P and the NASDAQ. Are you sort of positioning like a bull or cautious or bear, taking money off?
Yeah, so, well, I play a very particular role. I manage a high yield fund, which has equity-like characteristics in the fixed income space. And so I have to be very cognizant of the potential risk. We are seeing spreads very, very tight, which encourages us to seek out various ways to reduce the exposures that we may have.
Right.
At the same time, as you're pointing out, you know, to steal Chuck Prince's phrase, the music's still playing, you gotta dance. And so you have to figure out a way to stay in your position in the market while feeling comfortable with those risks. So far, we've been able to navigate that pretty well.
Michael Green, great to see you. Thank you. I like that phrase too. I hadn't heard that. I thought I heard them all, but I guess I haven't heard that one. The best one is where the puck is going. The Wayne Gretzky one.
Yes.
Don't use. I've heard that too many times.
Yes.
So lay off that one for a while. Thank you. Nice to see you.